Hello and welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to the Historical Humans podcast. My name's Justin Woods, and I'm joined today by my fellow co-hosts, Colum Coleman and Aaron Gilpin. And today we are traveling back to up the River Nile, and we are looking back at one of the oldest cultures in the world, some of the greatest, most memorable monuments to mankind that stand to this day thousands of years later. Why, we are talking none other than that of Old Kingdom Egypt, and we are talking about the creation, the characteristics, the artwork. Much more to come.
Was that all improv or did
Yeah,
you have
that was
that
just off
ready?
the cuff.
Yeah, who knows? This is what he does every time, and it's wildly variable. It does make the intros entertaining for us. We hope it's entertaining for you. But yeah, we're going very far back in time for this one, and this is actually arguably the second farthest back we've ever gone. Because the farthest back we've ever gone was our Stonehenge episode, which went back at most to about 3000 BC.
Mhm.
Here we will be beginning at the year 2650 BCE and going all the way to about 2130.
Wow.
Some dates may vary. This is Old Kingdom Egypt, and everyone lies on their resumes.
Well,
Yeah.
and then also doing some quick maths on top of it, we're looking about 4,100 years ago, roughly.
Yep. Yeah, that's when this ends. That's when we stop talking.
It's about 4,000 years ago, so,
Yeah.
yes.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah,
old.
we get to start talking at 4650 years old, and oh boy, there is a lot of different shall we say versions of how things happened when you get to that old in human history.
So what you're saying is it's almost like history wasn't fully fleeced out at that point, and it was difficult to record things.
Yeah, it's almost like these people were still figuring out writing and had very early on discovered that if you write it down, it might as well be the truth. Doesn't have to actually happen.
There's a reason why the list of kings
Yeah,
often varies
yeah.
list to
E-
list that they find.
Yep. Every date we give for dynasties and constructions and rulers, you can find a academic source that contradicts it. And you can find a source that
There's
supports it because these people were massive freaking liars.
oh
And
my God.
I feel the point now to have to interject here because I feel like certain people would take that the wrong way.
Oh yeah,
That
yes,
doesn't
please.
We
that
Yeah,
doesn't
please.
mean that the
We're setting
information
the
is
stage.
not accurate. It is accurate, but there are different variations to that. And a
Yeah,
lot of what archaeologists do is they try to tie what is known
yeah,
with what is factual. And that is
it's
a variable debate every time.
yeah. And
it's
the ancient
propaganda.
Egyptian,
That's
the,
all
the
it
yeah,
is.
the ancient Egyptians had this thing with accreditation where the dead don't talk back. And so if you were to just fudge some numbers on when you were pharaoh, then you could in theory claim the achievements of others and bolster your own, shall we say, social standing as the pharaoh and why everyone should listen to you, etc., etc. So there's a lot of that, and there's a lot of little rewrites that go on within ancient Egyptian society for people trying to maintain power. And you
Right.
get a lot of contradicting accounts and a lot of shifting dates as archaeologists because of that.
You get a lot of historical variations, and revisionism of history is as old as history. People
Yeah.
don't want the unfavorable things to be shown, and they want to take credit for many
Mhm.
great things. So there are oftentimes things that are considered great inventions or great hallmarks of the society that get reaccredited after the fact
Yep.
or after their death. And a lot of people, especially pseudoscientists and pseudo historians, like to use these variations and use these anomalies to say either that the archaeologists actually don't know what they're talking about, they use it to attack the credibility,
Yeah.
or a lot of times they'll use it to try and insert their own theory, creating a cloud of doubt like, well, archaeologists don't know what happened during this 300 years period.
Yeah,
Insert X. Maybe
yeah,
aliens came down from
yeah.
above and helped build this.
Yeah, there'll be a point in this podcast where there's an ideal gap to explore that kind of nonsense, because there are two pharaohs who we know reign right after each other, but the dates for their reigns have a 6-year gap between the two of them, and there's a lot of you know bullshit that can go on with something like that. It's just one is probably revised and one isn't.
And then the other big thing too to kind of highlight just in this moment is even with radiocarbon dating, which is considered to be the like peak dating method for a lot of this stuff, it has variations and standard deviations that take place in it. And with that being said, at this date range, about 4,000 years ago, those variations, even though they're only a standard deviation away, which is acceptable in most statistical instances, is equivalent to 200 to 400 years at some points. So, like, even the dates we have basically bookmark something within that range.
Yeah. Fortunately, the Egyptians loved writing things down, and since human beings don't live for 400 years, we get a lot narrower gaps when we combine different sources of evidence. But that's enough about setting the stage for why the dates are weird and why things can get kind of funky here. Let's talk about what we're here to talk about. And that is what everyone thinks of with Egypt. This is iconic ancient Egypt. This is the Old Kingdom, the age of the pyramid builders. This is when all of the arts and architecture and culture that we associate with Egypt comes into being. It is crystallized, codified, and distributed throughout the Nile.
So there was no denial there?
Now, there was a lot of denial. In fact, the Nile was the whole system they had to use to transport all this stuff. Without the Nile, there'd be nothing. There's a bunch of people in a bucket of sand.
The one last thing I'd like to just kind of make a point on here is Old Kingdom Egypt is so ancient that a lot of times when we think of Egyptian pharaohs, we think of Cleopatra, and the pyramids were more ancient to Cleopatra than she is to us in current day.
Yeah. There's a saying, Cleopatra is closer historically to landing on the moon than she is to building a pyramid. And that says a lot. And honestly, speaking of the pyramids, almost all our evidence for this time period comes from funerary texts and funerary architecture. It was sort of the hallmark obsession of ancient Egypt. And that's why we're going to talk about pyramids so much. It's not just because they're cool. It's because most of the things that have survived for 4,000 years did so because they were locked under several hundred tons of stone.
It's also just kind of comical too, because you tend to get an insight for what people cared about most by what there's an absence of. A lot of pyramids in Egypt were looted almost immediately after the pharaohs were locked away. You would get people running in there rummaging through, and they would take out precious metals, precious stones, but they'd leave the books behind.
Yep. Yeah. No one needs a pile of papyrus that's already been printed on.
But God forbid they have cool sarcophagi or effigies, anything of that nature. We're gonna yoink.
Well, that's why the outer lid of the sarcophagi is a 2-ton slab of stone, so you can't just push it off.
It's just kind of funny.
And to keep the mummy inside, because if he gets up and starts walking around, he shall become the undead and a plague upon Egypt and destroy the world, etc., etc. You've all seen the movies.
I just think it's honestly hilarious in that, obviously looting poses a big tragedy for historical sites, but I just find it so funny because we've got instances of looted and unlooted tombs, and just the amount of shit that people would take. Even King Tut's tomb, which we consider to be a pristine example, was very heavily looted.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, people like we really don't like or like it was a really big issue. Like we're joking about it now, but like it was a really big issue to for a long time to even suggest that ancient people didn't respect these sites
Yeah, because
because like
because
because of
they
these
had
curses that were
captured.
written on walls. Like they thought they fully believed the curses.
Yeah, and also just the reverence with which we hold them for being a giant monument from what 4,000 years ago. But you we before the looting can be a problem, we have to give the people something to loot. And that's where we get the third dynasty of Egypt, the founders of the Old Kingdom. These people ruled from 2650 to 2575 BCE, and it's kind of odd to start with the third dynasty of Egypt until you understand that the first two belong to what's called the pre dynastic period, and were busy doing things like murdering everyone else who said they were king of Egypt so that the third dynasty could, have an Egypt to rule.
Well, sometimes you got to just clear up the waters. They get a little too muddied if you got
Yeah.
too many pretenders to the throne.
Yeah. Yeah, and yeah, and so we get to enter our very first player of this game, King Net Jiraket, also known as Joser. Now, Joe here ruled for about 19 years. He's 2649 to 2630, undisputed pharaoh of Egypt. And he decides that he is found this place called Saqqara. He is going to build his funerary complex here. He's going to show all future generations what a great king and powerful, mighty, big, strong man he is by building a massive monument to his corpse. And at Saqqara, he decides that the best way to do this is he needs two things. Number one, a brand new building material that no one in Egypt had ever used before: actual rocks. I'm going to build the building out of stone.
Hmm.
Most Egyptian buildings were built from mud bricks, which basically amounted to pulling mud out of the banks of the Nile, arranging them in cute little rectangles, letting the desert sun bake them, and then stacking them up.
It's
Wait,
effective.
so you mean to tell me, and correct me where I diverge here, but
Yep.
that the easiest, most practical form to build on is to just stack the bricks together in a triangular pyramidal shape.
I
Oh,
was
you're
thinking
getting ahead of us.
square.
We haven't even figured that out yet.
Oh, we're
This is
just we're
square.
just making the bricks.
We've just figured out how to make bricks, and we've decided that bricks aren't good enough for this. This is going to be big. So forget bricks. Let's start hauling those giant boulders over and stacking them instead.
I mean, as long as you shape them down a little bit.
Yeah. To do this, he gets the world's first architect, Imhotep. That is actually this man's title, according to historians. He gets that nickname as the world's first architect. Imhotep is tasked with building this man's tomb. So, what does he do? He looks at the other mud brick structures that were being built at Saqqara by these other third dynasty officials: the priests, the administrators, the governors, basically everyone who works under the pharaoh. And he's thinking, okay, I will build the pharaoh's stone tomb in the same style as everyone else's, just bigger and made of a better material. So he builds a giant flat bench, a giant just flat podium called a mastaba. And he's done. He's good. You can fit the entire tomb inside. When you're done putting everyone inside the tomb that needs to be in there, you just put the stone in front of the door and good luck moving it. Except he has a problem. Joser won't die. Djoser is pharaoh for 19 years, which at this point in Egyptian history is about 7 reigns worth of pharaohs.
I mean,
So
that's good turnover. That's like every 2 years.
yeah. If a pharaoh did not rule for 5 years, much less 20. So what does he do? The pharaoh's pyramid, the pharaoh's tomb is complete, or the pharaoh's still alive. So he wants a grander tomb to reflect the fact that he is ruling longer. What do? There's no room to make the mastaba bigger.
You go up.
Till you build, you build up. So he builds a second mastaba, smaller, on top of the first. And the roof doesn't collapse.
Oh.
Ooh.
So he builds a third, a fourth, and a fifth.
The mad lad.
Task failed successfully.
Yep. Creating what is known as the stepped pyramid. And yeah, it's the first pyramid of Egypt, and it looks like someone invented stairs. It really does. If you were about 90 feet tall, you would call these things stairs. But it's the first pyramid. He does a couple other little tricks here too to make the pyramid work for Djoser. First thing he does is he makes it on a north-south axis, sort of reflecting the flow of the River Nile. This is a mistake, as all the other pharaohs immediately turned their pyramid complexes 90 degrees to reflect the passing of the sun overhead. Yeah, it's like so. Yeah. And the reason for this is because this is a tomb, and for the Egyptians, the traveling of the sun around the world reflected the cycle of life, death, afterlife, and rebirth. And they wanted the sun to be able to pass through their tomb and carry them along in that cycle. They wanted the sun to follow with them. And so they shift it 90 degrees after Djoser's pyramid. And there's only one other real thing of note here for the third dynasty. It's kind of a bare bones dynasty. There's not a lot of interesting things going on besides Djoser and Imhotep inventing the pyramid. But it is important to note for later dynasties. And that is, with Djoser and the third dynasty, the pharaoh is the ultimate figure of authority on everything. He is the voice of God. He is the high priest of God. He is the king, the king's advisor, the king's counselor, the king's administrator, the hand of the king, and he who does the king's will. All authority stems from him and him alone. Any action that any governor or nomarch wishes to take must be approved by him. It is the ultimate in centralized authority. Everyone else who used to be a king or a lord in Egypt, they get the new job of tax collector. You don't have a local governor, you have a local tax collector.
It's the tax man.
Yep. And if we know anything about taxes, that's a great way to make people hate your political rivals. He's not the mayor of your town. He's the tax collector of your town. Sure, he does all the mayor stuff, but his job is tax collector.
There's only 2 certainties in life, even true back then. The only things that are guaranteed are death and taxes.
That's certainly the only thing the Egyptians seem to care about.
Oh no, they were the first real bureaucrats.
Yep. Oh yeah. The bureaucracy is going to get bad later on.
Yikes.
But with Djoser and his short-lived third dynasty, we get to go to the fourth dynasty, which is 2557 to 2465. Blah. These people make it a little bit further. They get to last over 100 years in power. This second family here. And there's a whole argument that this is the dynasty that marks the start of the Old Kingdom because nothing really happens besides the step pyramid that we know of with the third dynasty. They're kind of just there. But the fourth dynasty, which is founded by the pharaoh Snefru, they see the step pyramid and they say, we can do better. We're going to smooth it out. We're going to make it bigger. We're going to build 1,000,000 of them. Snefru, who rules for 24 years, goes absolutely ham with just trial and error for finding the perfect way to build a pyramid. So much so that he builds for himself 3 separate pyramid tombs. The first 2 don't really go as well, but collectively they are known as the Pyramid of Medum, the Bent Pyramid, and the Red Pyramid. Now, the Bent Pyramid, I believe, is the first attempt.
Mm-hmm.
And
where it's like it's the one that's at like that.
The angle changes about half to 2/3 of the way up due to a structural collapse when they realized that the foundations of the desert sand that they were building on could not support the weight required to complete the pyramid, and it was starting to cave in on itself and sink into the desert. It is it looks pretty funny, and it's one of those pyramids that doesn't get talked about a lot, but it goes out of its way to show you that these are human beings over several centuries learning how to do this.
So you mean it wasn't aliens that just dropped them down onto Earth or taught people how to build them perfectly the first time?
Yeah, no. The Great Pyramid of Giza is actually relatively late in the pyramid building process. It's almost 170 years into how to build a pyramid. Do people build the big one that everyone knows?
I wonder what kind of YouTube tutorial they watched back then.
Yeah. It's just a little scroll of papyrus.
Yeah. Wait, turn the scroll back a little bit. I missed a part.
No, not that image. The next one. The one with the hammer in it.
Wait, go back. How do we move the block from where we quarried it to put it on?
Ropes, barges, bunch of logs maybe. I don't know. We'll figure it out.
Oh my god.
But for all the failings that the pyramids at Medum and Dashur have under Snefru, they are what gives us the final pyramid shape that we know and love today. That everyone goes to Giza and Egypt to go and gawk at and take photos trying to hold on their shoulders. It's it is Snefru that gives us that gets us to that, because Snefru is succeeded by a man named Khufu. Khufu rules from 2551 to 2528, and it is Khufu that moves the funerary sites of the pharaohs from Dashur to Giza, where he builds the Great Pyramid and he standardizes the pyramid complex, which is a series of pathways, temples, and fake buildings that you build around the outside of the pyramid as sort of a mini town for the pharaoh's ghost to live in during the afterlife. The Egyptian afterlife consisted, at least in part, of the pharaoh waking up in his tomb, picking up some of the tomb goods that were left there for him to use, and then wandering around his little tomb town, using them for whatever it was he felt like doing.
Like a necropolis.
It is also kind of interesting, too, because on top of the quote-unquote fake village that they built, at the pyramid complex in Giza, they have found, I think, 2 or 3 separate worker villages that were maybe a couple hundred yards away. That there's evidence of where the craftsmen and where the artisans worked, and it's just kind of interesting that they lived and worked on the space, and that they were within close proximity at pretty much all times.
Oh yeah, no, you had the craftsmen basically had a mini city that would be built around where the pyramid was going to be, that they would live in until the pyramid was completed, at which point they would tear everything down and disperse because it's sort of like when the US built the Hoover Dam. We built a ton of stuff right next to the Hoover Dam to house everyone. And all that's left of that now is Vegas.
Oh yeah.
Like Vegas continued to exist, but most of the time, most of the stuff ceased to exist because once the dam is built, there is no massive government work project requiring tens of thousands of human beings on site at all times. There's just not that need, so it disperses. It's like a gold rush. Sometimes the town stays. Sometimes you just walk through the ruins of something that's really creepifying.
Hey, we love abandoned mine towns here, okay?
Yeah.
Especially with veins that actually still are good.
Yeah. That's the
Yeah.
dream.
Yep.
Oh, bandit gold in them there hills.
I've been digging in these here mines all day. I'm tired, Grandpa.
That's too damn bad.
Now, Khufu is followed by Khafre and Menkaure, who complete the pyramids of Giza by building their own pyramids next to the Great Pyramid of Giza and completing that sort of trifecta that is the iconic landscape we have today. What's interesting is that starting with Khafre, they start incorporating large amounts of royal statuary. They just build statues of themselves everywhere in the complex. Just dozens of these things, just all over the place. And these statues are perfectly rigid, perfectly at attention, and very perfectly chiseled. There is no identifying features on the face, there is no identifying features on the body. If you were to take a man mold of the perfect idealized human bodybuilder and just stand it up at attention, you would have what all these statues look like.
I mean, it makes sense. One size fits all, and if it's a good image, if it makes everyone look tough and buff,
Yep. Yeah, no, that was the whole point. It's like, look at how awesome this pharaoh is. I mean, have you ever seen a human being with an arm that big?
And then you go through and look at every other statue, and it's all just mirror images.
Yeah. Yeah, because the point was to project to anyone walking by, this is what the pharaoh is, this impossibly buff Arnold Schwarzenegger man. And you're not an Arnold Schwarzenegger man. How could you possibly stand up to a man that manly? It's the psychology of it all. Because fun fact, the original pharaohs, the ones of the first and second dynasty we don't get to talk about today, they were regional warlords.
Yeah.
They're the entire basis of the pharaoh's right to rule will stem from religion, but it originally stemmed from military might.
Also, in the first dynasty, the way they dealt with pretenders was literally kill all the children.
Yeah, it was kill everyone. It was bad.
In pre-dynastic Egypt, that was also very common.
Yeah, pre-dynasty Egypt was really messed up. Thankfully, we're in the Old Kingdom. We get to start talking about the fancy stuff with the Third Dynasty, as if there's not a massive history of bloodshed behind it.
Right.
But yeah, speaking of fun things and, sweeping away incidents under the rug, Khafre also is the man who gives us the, Sphinx at Gaza, the Great Sphinx, which, is of course missing his nose.
Well, that's just because too many people would walk by. You ever see those statues that the nose is like golden instead of the traditional bronze color because too many people are rubbing on it? That's all that happened. People saw Big Kitty and went, "Ooh, pretty kitty," and would rub its
Yes.
nose.
Yes, and they
They,
brought
and
ladders to get up that high.
I mean,
then
to
they
be
got tired,
fair,
so they just chiseled it off. And they're just like, now we can poop the nose much
no,
better.
No one really has the definitive answer for how that nose was lost. There's a very fun story about how the Arabs fired a cannon into it because they hate art and history for some unknowable reason. That's a lie, by the way, but it is one of
Honestly, I thought that
history.
was Napoleon.
It could it's also gets applied to Napoleon. Fun fact: that story gets applied to literally every human being who has ever invaded Egypt gets blamed for shooting off the Sphinx's nose.
I
That's
mean,
fucking hilarious.
realistically, it probably. Well, I know a good portion of the cause was erosion due to the winds. I mean, you're in the middle of a desert.
Yeah, it was the desert destroyed the Sphinx's nose, but
But
people like the story that a warlord came and blew it up.
but we also don't talk about the fact that up until like the early 20th century, the Sphinx was almost entirely covered by sand. It wasn't until they started excavating the sand around it that they're like, wait, it has a body?
Oh, so people really
It was
were just pooping the nose.
Yes.
Listen, you have disrupted the kitty sand bath. You must pay the price.
The kitty sand bath. Oh no, it was in the litter box.
You
Yeah.
don't talk about me now.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh no.
But
Oh
yeah.
no. Oh no.
Anyway,
no,
dur-
no.
yeah. During the fourth dynasty, you can still see the very clear demarcation of power between the pharaohs and their officials because the officials are still only allowed to use mastabas. They're not allowed to stack. They're not allowed to build pyramids. Only a pharaoh gets a pyramid. Everyone else gets a mastaba. So, with the Sphinx and with Giza and all that stuff, you see that it is still a very powerful and very autocratic society. And what's fun about it is, and what people don't talk about is, there are actually dozens of mastabas scattered around the Great Pyramids. Some of them, most of them are still buried in the sand. Some of them have been excavated, some haven't. And that's just all the high officials trying to show how important they were because they could afford real estate next to the pharaoh.
Yeah, that's hilarious. I love that.
Yeah.
Brown nosers.
Oh, absolutely. They.
Oh, 100%. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh yeah, it is 100% random. And this is also at the end of the fourth dynasty where we get to talk about our first Egyptian war.
Oh, first war. Where?
See, there are two pharaohs named Shepshikov and Djef, uh, Jedepatah, who I will be calling Jed for the rest of this. Anyway, Shep and Jed decide that they are going to invade Canaan, which is basically Israel in modern day times, Israel and Palestine. They're just going to invade all that. And they're going to march in the opposite direction and invade Nubia, which is now Sudan.
Interesting.
Bold strategy,
And
Cotton.
yep. And the purpose of this is they want to spread Egyptian influence throughout the Levant, throughout Sudan. They want the things these people have.
Right, right.
These people have some really nice things that Egypt doesn't have because Egypt has great farmland and almost no other natural resource. Unless you count buckets of sand. But, we don't.
I
So
also
they
just don't think they developed great mining techniques at this point.
Yeah, no. They want these people's copper. They want these people's trees. They want everything these people have. They are tired of importing lumber and other shit to make papyrus.
And paying the surcharges and the traders and all the fees.
Yeah. So they might as well just invade you and force a good trade deal. And that is what they do.
Oh, like their expeditions into.
Yeah. It basically they don't have the CIA to make things happen for them, so they do it themselves.
Oh no. The Egyptians.
They
And
are-
then they talk about it in all their carvings.
Yes. They're going into a neighboring state that they think they can take militarily for the purposes of forcing it into unfavorable trade deals with Egypt.
Wait a minute. Where have I heard this before?
Brr, 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 brr,
And
Is this the
simultaneous.
entire U.S. military doctrine for the Middle
Yep.
East?
Yep.
Yes.
Fun fact: the Egyptians are also here kickstarting the concept of everyone has a claim to Jerusalem, because now Egypt has a claim to Jerusalem. The Canaanites have a claim to Jerusalem. In about 500 years, the Hittites will have a claim to Jerusalem. Then the Persians, and then we just keep going. So yeah, thank you, Egypt. Thank you. What were your names again here? Shep and Jed,
Look,
for starting us on this long, horrible journey.
it's not the first or last time Egypt will invade that area.
Yeah.
Even have done so in the past 50 years.
Yeah, no. It's going to become a constant issue, constant thing of just invading the Levant. Fortunately, I don't think we have to talk about that again for the Old Kingdom. So, hooray.
Yay!
Yay, happiness. We get to go to the Fifth Dynasty. The Fifth Dynasty is going to hold the record so far for how long you can rule as a single family here. It's getting longer. Egypt is stabilizing. The Fifth Dynasty rules from 2465 to 2323. And if the song 2525 has taught me anything, you never want to be in a year that repeats. Because bad
Explains
thing.
2020.
Yeah.
Yep. Yep.
Yeah.
It's bad.
1919. Oof.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
It's all coming together. But my cronkness aside, we get to have a very lovely return to pronounceable normal names with the founder of the Fifth Dynasty, Sahure. Now, under Sahure and the Fifth Dynasty, temples become massive. They're decorated, they're bigger, they are more important than ever before. Where in the Fourth Dynasty, it was all about the king's tomb, it was all about building the biggest, most important pyramid. Now it's about having the fanciest temple as your front door. It's what part of the building is important. And now it's the temple. Religion has come to Egypt. And it is blooming. The priesthood is on the rise. Your connection with heaven is now more important than the monumentality of your house. And there are all sorts of depictions, military victories, offerings, and bureaucratic meetings with the gods. The gods coming down and just having a chat with you. Maybe they're staying for tea. Maybe it's a board meeting. You don't know. You're not the pharaoh. You don't get to know. But the idea of the pharaohs being this direct connection with the council of heaven really starts getting plastered all over the place with the Fifth Dynasty. That whole connection of the god king as this living vessel of the gods really gets propagandized with the Fifth Dynasty. And there is a sort of power struggle going on within the religion. And it's namely for who is the most important god here? Ra, god of the sun, or Osiris, god of the afterlife? Who's more important? Who do we depict more? Who gets better stuff? That's the whole debate of the Fifth Dynasty, is trying to solve the hierarchy of the Egyptian religion. And the pyramids go into decline. They are moved away from Giza, and they are instead constructed at Abu Sir. And about halfway through this dynasty, there's a major power shift, which basically amounts to Egypt is big, it's prosperous, and it's complicated because we've got all these foreign ties we have to manage now. The immediate and extended family of the pharaoh is no longer enough to fill all necessary administrative positions, which means that the nomarchs, the local tax collectors that used to be kings 300 years ago, they suddenly all get promoted to members of the pharaoh's court, to high officials of the pharaohs. Some of them get to operate in his name and speak with his voice. And this is a major dissemination of power. Because there's all these wealthy elite families that are now enriching themselves off of all the pharaoh's coffers, off of all these cushy, high-paying government jobs.
Still a bunch of fucking leeches.
Yep. Yep. And it kind of goes unnoticed because for the last two dynasties, if your head accountant was pilfering the treasury to build his own house, well, the head accountant was your nephew. So all the money was staying within the family. All the monuments, all the power, all the prestige associated with the, royal accountant having a, massive house. Now, it's associated with this other dude who has no relation to the pharaoh. Suddenly, people who aren't you look cool, and people start respecting them for it.
How dare they?
Exactly. And we see the mastabas of the high officials start becoming more elaborate than the pyramids. They're still not allowed to build pyramids. They still can't build up.
Mm-hmm.
Those motherfuckers.
But
I
they
would end
can
them all.
carve. They can carve the hell out of them. They can get fancy colonnades. They can do everything but build up. And they make sure to let the pharaohs know that.
Oh, but Sir King, we did not build up. We just built over.
Yep. Yep. Or down. We burrowed into the ground and built a giant underground complex. They do that too sometimes. It's actually quite funny.
I think that's where a lot of our best preserved tombs come from, actually. It's ones that were buried because the tunnels would collapse, and that's how we would eventually find them was, someone goes, hey, why is there this huge collapse here? And that's why they never got looted.
Yep. Also, the tomb raiders were really not willing to turn and go, okay, boys, punch this wall in the building we're standing in, and it will lead to a treasure room. They were not willing to gamble on that.
Weaklings.
Yep.
If Minecraft taught me anything, you dig beneath yourself.
Yes, always dig straight down. But, yeah. There's also a major artistic change at the end of the dynasty. There's what's called the second style. And this is where all those statues that we had in the third dynasty, they start getting faces, like actual human faces on them. The statues start moving, they start changing. They get big eyes, they get slender shoulders, they start smiling. They're no longer super buff. They start actually depicting something closer to the pharaohs themselves, to what would be a human being that has spent their entire life in bureaucratic administration.
Sounds like a weeping angel at that point.
Yeah.
They're growing faces, they're moving.
Yep. Yeah, there's a little bit of motion put in, because remember, everything had to be rigid, at attention, and very, very idealized. And that's no longer the case. The statues start looking like people. That's a big deal for something as rooted in tradition as Egypt is, where change is very slow. Because remember, change is measured in ruling families rather than in decades years or even centuries. It's measured in dynasties.
So pretty much the exact same as like most major league sports,
Yeah.
based
Yeah,
on
except
what
that
dynasties ran the league.
yeah, except sports dynasties, those die off relatively quickly.
I don't know. Look at the Yankees or the Montreal Canadiens. Those
Yeah.
dynasties lasted forever.
Yeah. Yeah, but like, most of them don't last beyond 2 decades as a sports dynasty. Egyptian dynasties can last up to 300 years.
It's but a
Imagine that.
blink in the eye.
Yeah. 300 years of no change. Things can get bad. But anyway, the religious dispute does finally come to an end near the end of the fifth dynasty. Osiris is crowned as most important god of gods, not Ra. No, Ra makes his comeback later when he fuses with Amun and becomes Amun Ra. But right now,
All right.
Osiris is the big important god because he is the god of the afterlife, and the afterlife is where all the good stuff is. Because this is Old Kingdom Egypt, and remember, life still sucks. We don't even have air conditioning.
Everything is awful.
Yeah.
Everything is horrible when you're part of a team.
Yeah. And speaking of teams, the Egyptians at this point also discover the apes together strong meme and start lashing a bunch of logs together. And they discover that this somehow makes the logs float together as one giant raft. Who knew? They invent a raft.
I imagine they
Logs
cut down one
together.
log and it was floating. And then some guy was like, all right, well, why don't you just lash a couple together and maybe you could stand on it?
Yeah, if they tie them together tight enough, they can build a raft. And they eventually, during the Fifth Dynasty, figure out how to turn these things into the Egyptian barges that become very iconic for ancient Egypt later down the line. But right now, they're very crude versions of that. They also discover that if you make the raft big enough, you can put a ton of weight on it before it starts sinking. And that means one thing for the Egyptians: trade.
Pirates.
Yep. They decide that they are going to trade along 3 routes. They are going to trade along the Nile River with what is now Sudan. They are going to trade along the Mediterranean coast with what is now Lebanon. And they are going to trade along the Red Sea with what is now, was it Somalia, I believe? Yes, Somalia. And their goal is to get wealthy, prestige goods from these places and bring them home. They want wood, copper, gold, incense, ebony. They want all these prestige goods to come back into Egypt to make Egypt this land of wealth that we all know. In return, Egypt offers them more food than any of them have ever seen in their entire lives. Because Egyptian agriculture is and will remain the #1 producer of crops in basically, I don't know, the world. I think, maybe some places in China compete with them for that. But they're the #1 producer of crops in, let's just call it the West, for about the next, I'd say whenever Rome falls, so about 3,000 years.
See,
Yeah.
I understand the point you're making. I would almost argue that Mesopotamia was a bigger breadbasket at this time, just between the confluences of the Tigris and Euphrates. There's a reason it's known as the cradle of civilization, because a lot of civilizations pop up through there.
Yeah, true. However, Mesopotamia is during this time period undergoing what Egypt went through during the pre-dynastic period, which is a lot of these big cities trying to murder one another and destroying each other's crops and limiting production.
Yeah.
Egypt's civil wars are relatively infrequent, which means that there is centuries-long periods where they can just focus on maximizing output as opposed to
Yeah,
stabbing the man next to each other because he's an Akkadian and you're a Babylonian.
the Egyptian elite quite literally close ranks really fast. They prefer stability because stability is the only way they're going to keep being rich.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now, the end of the Old Kingdom period, the first, what is it called? The first intermediate period is about 170 years of civil war. So when they do go to war, everything stops. But when we're in a dynastic period, the bread will flow.
Mhm.
There will
Like,
be blood bread.
yeah, like spice off Arrakis, it flows.
Oh my
This
god.
place was full.
The spice.
Yeah. Yeah, see, where were we? But yeah, there's that, there's all this prosperity and trade, and we see sort of the ending of the pyramid and the temple tradition in the fifth dynasty. It doesn't die with the fifth dynasty, but you see the writing on the wall for its end. Because the final two pharaohs of the fifth dynasty, they don't build funerary temples. They move the royal cemetery back to Saqqara, where Djoser built the stepped pyramid. And they instead build these small pyramids called the pyramid, I believe it's the Pyramid of Unas, where they are just carving every religious text they know into the walls of the pyramid itself. They combine the pyramid and the temple into a single building and try to force a unification between the church and the state, with the pharaoh again as the sole proprietor of power. Because that's what the pharaohs were
Mhm.
when the tombs were at Saqqara, when Djoser was pharaoh. They were the sole arbiter of religion, of statehood, of authority in any form. And it's this desperate attempt to use the pyramids to call back to that and cling to power. And it absolutely fails.
Ah,
All the
love this is
texts, yep, all the texts are centered around Osiris, and all the subsequent pharaohs will continue to put texts on the walls of their pyramids. But it's a death spiral. Because once they start doing this, they get replaced.
Oh no.
And the sixth dynasty enters the stage, ruling from 2323 to 2130. This dynasty will last the longest, and that will kill them. Because it turns out that when your kings live longer than the Queen of England, there gets to be some really messed up succession crises.
yeah.
Especially when
But
polygamy's involved.
oh yeah, yeah. But on the plus side, the sixth dynasty is all about women. What do
Yeah,
women
yeah.
get? What do we do with women? What are women? Because up until this point, everything we've talked about has been male oriented to the point of extreme toxicity.
What are women?
Yep. Yep. We see
Women.
Yep. We see queens' pyramids adorned with funerary texts. We see bigger and better temples. We see the wives of the pharaohs being allowed to be buried in pyramids. That's right, the pharaoh's wife had to live outside the pharaoh's
Oh,
house in the afterlife.
Oh, that's harsh.
Pharaoh had a
Yikes.
big the pharaoh had a big fancy house for his corpse, and his wife had a little side house outside.
Oh no, that's like sleeping in the doghouse, but worse.
Yeah.
For the rest of eternity, you get to sleep in the she shed.
Yep. Yeah. And that is why everything we have mentioned so far has been extremely toxic masculinity. because it's that bad. Now, prior to the Sixth Dynasty, the only people who could be buried in a pyramid was a man or a queen mother. If you had given birth to this pharaoh, you were allowed to live in his house, in his tomb.
Oh no! So not only were you not allowed to live in the pyramid, your stepmother got that Oh, or not stepmother, your mother-in-law. That's even worse, I
Yeah,
think.
your mother-in-law got the privilege. Also, possibly your stepmother, given the fact that Egyptian pharaonic families tend to have a beanstalk for a family tree.
God,
Hmm.
it's
Yeah,
your evil stepmother-in-law.
yep, yep. And with this expansion of who's allowed into the pyramid, it comes in tandem with all those officials, all those court officials that are no longer related to the pharaoh anymore. They're a lot wealthier and a lot more influential under the Sixth Dynasty. They start being able to do this thing called saying no.
Wow, I didn't know
Now,
a
if
woman
you
could do that. Joke,
yeah,
joke.
yeah. Now, if you were a
I mean,
court
even at this
official,
time period, that
if
yeah, I'm sure.
Ugh.
yeah, if you were a court official back in the Third Dynasty when this kingdom period started, and you walked up to the pharaoh and said no, you no longer had a tongue to say no with, and that was if he was feeling good today.
You hereby lose your ability to say. Ugh.
Yeah, or just your head. Sometimes they just
Probably.
killed you. You didn't get to say no to these people, and now they can. However, the pharaohs are clever. They have a plan to combat this whole democratization of power thing that's going on in their very autocratic society. And that is repopulate the family tree. They are going to marry multiple women at the same time. They're going to marry more women, and they're going to start marrying outside the royal family.
Oh, that's a big deal.
That is a big deal. This is also a sign that some people have become so wealthy and influential that the pharaoh needs their money.
Really schmoozing them there.
Yep. It gets so bad that two pharaohs, the very aptly named Pepi the First, who rules from 2289 to 2255, and Pepi the Second, who rules from 2246 to 2151, marry between 6 to 8 women each. It kind of depends on who you ask and what they decided qualified as being married to the pharaoh.
Oh,
Yeah, there are some really messed up things going on in here that we will not be saying, or at least I hope we won't be saying.
yeah, harems aren't great places, guys.
Yeah,
No,
especially
it's
not
a
for the
good one.
women involved.
Yeah. Now, a little side note here: the gap between Pepi the First and Pepi the Second is one of those things we mentioned at the start of this podcast about how there are conflicting dates for the pharaohs, even though we know that Pepi the Second succeeded Pepi the First on the throne. It's just some of those, one of those dates was edited by Pepi the Second, and the other one wasn't. It's just one of those fun little things where Pepi the Second is sort of trying to claim that Pepi the First died a little bit earlier than he did, so that Pepi the Second
Oh,
can get away with claiming whatever it was that Pepi the First did for the last 10 years of his life.
oh, he was trying to steal credit.
Like, wow, you did such a great job fixing the economy. You mean I did such a great job fixing the economy?
Yeah, you were a fool to name me after you, father. Now I only have to change one letter in the entire inscription.
Oh my God! Behind every single rock carving, you see him walking up, just adding the second I to everything.
Yeah, yeah. It's kind of like that, but like this is a good example of those gaps where you know Pepi's reign began in 2246. Pepe the First gets pushed back to 2255 because Pepe the Second is putting his name on everything, but he's not able to get everything.
They really did try, though. Sometimes they did a really good job.
Just not this time around.
Yeah, Pepe the Second did good, just not good enough. What also happens with our two beloved Pepes is there's an increased interest in the provinces of Egypt. See, up until this point, all that mattered was where the pharaoh was, and that was where all the wealth went, and that was the only place that was actually any good to live. There's this beginning of this idea that, you know, maybe all of Egypt should be glorified and have massive, beautiful stone temples to the gods and, I don't know, basic infrastructure.
Blasphemous, I tell you, blasphemous.
Yep. And it is one of those signs of the decline of the pharaohs, because now, being one of those nomarchs, being the regional governor tax collector for the pharaoh, for the first time since that became a job, is that a job that people want to have. It's actually prestigious. It actually pays well. You actually get to make decisions. The balance of power has shifted enough that all these people that are descended from former kings can actually start having their own power bases without having to be a member of the pharaoh's inner circle.
So now you could be the assistant regional manager?
Assistant to the regional manager, yes.
Okay.
Yep. Which, of course, only applies unless head of sales is out.
Those bastards.
Yep. And we see the shift, the beginning of the shift away from mastabas and pharaohs and the pharaoh's pyramids here as well. People stopped building them. Under Merenre I, who rules as kind of this interregnum guy with the Pepes. It's kind of unclear whether or not he's involved in anything or not. You know, but there's this guy called Merenre I, and he sees a bunch of rock-cut provincial tombs. He starts working on what is going to be like the Valley of the Kings later on, where the pharaohs are just sort of digging holes in the side of these cliff faces and hiding the bodies.
Hey, maybe having these massive tombs that keep getting looted and robbed aren't the best ideas.
Yep. Yeah, it's about this point with the Pepes and Merenre that the pharaohs start realizing a giant beacon of wealth is a great way to say, please come rob me.
In the afterlife, though.
Yeah. So they start looking at ways to hide it. However, it's not long after this, with Pepe's reign, that the central government of Egypt and the entirety of the Old Kingdom collapse completely. See, Pepe's reign has three key problems to it. Number one, like we've already discussed, central authority around the pharaoh has grown incredibly weak at this point. The provincials are starting to think they can demand things. Issue number two, the women.
God damn it, it's always them.
Pepe has too many wives.
Oh, yeah.
And he has multiple sons by all of them. This creates a bit of a succession crisis, which leads into problem number three. Pepe, number two here, supposedly rules for 90 years. This is unconfirmed because, again, it is 4,200 years ago. But that is the story, that Pepe is a boy king who just rules until he's 100. And, you know, part of it kind of sticks. And the issue with this is no one knows what to do with the line of succession. It's all muddied. The firstborn sons are dead. Some of their grandsons are dead. So, you know, you have the grandkids or the great grandkids of this line fighting with the last surviving kid of this line, fighting with this line that married someone politically powerful. Who's the right pharaoh? Who is the rightful pharaoh? It's, there is no I'm the eldest son, give it to me. There's, there's just too many gaps in the lineage. Finally, with all of that pressure going on internally, it just needs a little spark to just cause it to implode. And this being Old Kingdom Egypt, the grand age of the pyramid builders, for its final collapse into catastrophe, it is not worthy of one spark. It is worthy of two.
Oh,
Yeah. Spark number one that sets off this powder keg with Pepe's death. Climate change.
oh, how that happened?
Yep. Remember how we kept talking about Egypt being a breadbasket? Well, Egypt is undergoing a period of desertification at this time. It is becoming hotter and more arid in Egypt than it ever was before. The
Hey, wait a
desert
minute.
is
Where have I heard this before?
Actually,
the desert encroaches on the Nile.
this actually kind of highlights back in the terminal Pleistocene into the early Holocene, talking geologic terms. The Sahara was one of the most prominent, like, rainforests in the world.
It used to be green.
Yeah, and this is just the, like, I would feel like almost last dying breaths of that change of it actually, like you said, desertifying.
Yeah, this basically is what takes it from what takes Egypt and the Sahara from that sort of quasi-arid stuff you get with places like New Mexico, where it's a brush kind of desert, and turns it into the full-on salt flats of Utah. It just desertifies everything. The livable land shrinks. The amount of crops you get from the Nile shrink. The flow of the Nile goes down because there's less water in it. More of it's being evaporated by the sun because it's hotter out. The Nile's still massive, don't get me wrong.
Yeah, second
But it's
largest river, but
yeah, it's less than it was before.
Mm.
And when you base your entire authority on being the god king of eternal prosperity, people start blaming you for climate change.
It's a shame that people just still don't believe it today, 4,000 years later.
Yeah, it's bad. But reason number two is, you remember when we were mentioning how the fourth dynasty or whatever it was, the fourth dynasty started invading Nubia and wanted to impose all these things on Sudan.
Mm.
Well, it turns out Nubia didn't like that very much, and at around this time invades Egypt.
Dope. Not supposed to fight back.
Yep. So Egypt is undergoing a massive drought. It is being invaded from the south. Its regional officials are outside the control of the central government. And the king is dead with no clear heir apparent.
Recipe for disaster, so it sounds.
Yep. The Old Kingdom collapses into civil war with Pepe II's death, ending the Sixth Dynasty, ending the Old Kingdom, and bringing about the first intermediate period, which is effectively about 170 years of infighting. About 2150 to 1980 BCE. You get the 7th and 8th dynasties during this time. You also see all those nomarchs become autonomous little petty kings again. Yeah, it gets pretty bad for the Egyptians during this time.
Everything's cyclical. It goes back to the way it starts.
Yep. And then you get the Middle Kingdom, and this whole thing starts all over again.
Dope.
Yeah, yeah, two dynasty interregnum period. A little, rinse and spit here. Everyone gets to pretend they're their own king again, and we're right back to where we started with probably the most authoritarian state on Earth.
Oh, damn it.
Yeah. Yeah.
But yeah, kind of a cool little place for us to wrap up there, I think, right?
Mhm.
If you guys enjoyed today's episode, let us know what you think down below. If you're listening to us on Spotify or your favorite podcasting platform, be sure to follow the show and share it with others. Let people know. And yeah, we'll see you in the next episode. And next time, we've got a fun one ahead for you here. We are going to be going to Mexico and talking about the Aztecs. So be sure to stay tuned because that will be a very, very fun one. We're going to be talking about yet another pyramid building culture.
Yep.
And
Oh, yeah, it's going to be very fun. Blood, sacrifice, and a version of Mother Nature that actively tries to kill you.
and yeah, we'll see you guys in the next one. Peace.